I'm Gordon Anderson. I'm the current chair of the Labour History Project. So welcome everybody to this event, the Rona Bailey Memorial Lecture, which of course marks the life and work of activist Rona Bailey. Normally I would introduce the lecture by providing a short biography of Rona Bailey and of her importance in New Zealand history. However, as this year's lecture is entitled Rona Bailey, Communist Pākehā Artist Activist, it seems somewhat redundant to do that. Now, of course, I don't want to be in the position of telling you badly what tonight's lecture will articulate considerably more coherently. So I will content myself with making the point that Rona was a founding member of the Trade Union History Project, now the Labour History Project, and that following her death in 2005, the then committee determined to commemorate her memory by a biennial lecture. The inaugural lecture was given in 2007 by Robert Reid, who was then president of the National Distribution Union. Since then, there have been a further 7 biennial lectures on a wide range of topics and by a wide range of speakers. Tonight is the 9th Rona Bailey Memorial Lecture, assuming I counted correctly and at the last moment found the one that wasn't on the website, and will be given by Cybèle Locke and focuses on Rona herself. I'm sure you all know Cybèle, and I'm equally sure you've all purchased a copy of her book, Comrade Bill Anderson. If not, I'm sure they're still available. When Cybèle is not occupied with her role as a member of the Labour History Project Committee, she is a senior lecturer at the history program in the Haringa Waka Victoria University of Wellington, and her work centres on narratives of 20th century working class. Her first book, Wonders in the Margins, Union Radicals in Post-War New Zealand, explored the roles of women, Māori, Pacifica and unemployed workers, and the role they played in working class organisation and protest. Her most recent book, of course, carries on the same theme with Comrade Bill Anderson, traces how trade union leader Bill Anderson encountered the world between 1924 and 2005. And just last year, Cybèle published a chapter in the Palgrave Handbook of Communist Women Activists. It's amazing the number of handbooks that some publishers manage to dream up these days. It was called Dancing for the Revolution, Rona Bailey, New Zealand Artist Activist. Tonight's lecture, of course, continues to explore facets of Rona's life and the times in which she lived. And in this lecture, Cybèle, I think, is going to talk about Rona's lifelong grassroots activism. So, comrades, please welcome Cybèle to present the 2024 Rona Bailey Lecture, Rona Bailey, Communist Pākehā Artist Activist.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Nā mihi nui kia koutou kua tai mai nei, ko roomies, me ko zoomies. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tēnei te mihi ki te mana whenua, ko te ati awa me taranaki whānui tai atu ki Ngāti Tō Rangatira. Nā mihi, nā mihi, nā mihi. No airani, no ingarangi, no kotorani, oku tūpuna. Ko tangata tiriti ahau, ko Pākehā ahau, ko Cybèle Locke tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So before I get underway tonight, there's just a few acknowledgements I want to make. First to the many and varied comrades of Rona. Absolute respect for those who knew her personally. I look forward to conversations afterwards with a glass of wine. I also want to especially acknowledge those who have written about Rona, whose work I'm drawing on, particularly tonight. There is many others in my footnotes, which you can't see. But I really want to acknowledge Peter Franks, Marion Schultz, David Grant, and I especially want to acknowledge Meg Bailey, who is here with us tonight, Rona's daughter, for in the beginning of this project giving me permission to look at the most amazing left-wing archive I've ever encountered here upstairs. for being here tonight, and also want to acknowledge Rona's granddaughter, who I believe is listening in from Auckland. So, on with it then. There are certain moments from your past that sink in and make you. As Rona's friend Ian Milner recalled, Depression-era policies were a foil for socialist alternatives. The unemployed workers and working women's movements, the anti-eviction activity of the Communist Party of New Zealand radicalised a strong number of Rona's contemporaries in the early 1930s. However, while Rona remembered the Gisborne Hunger March, which is depicted up there, she was largely protected from the economic ravages of the Great Depression. Her parents, Catherine and Isaac Stevenson, ran a successful footwear business, which saw Rona through the whole of high school in Gisborne, and then on to Teachers College. A vivacious redhead, she was fabulous at sport, particularly netball. Austerity policies did eradicate her final year of Teachers College. However, thanks to a bequest from her favourite aunt, she was able to complete her physical education degree at the University of Berkeley and then Columbia University in New York City between the years of 1937 to 1939. These were the years, I argue, that made her. At International House in Berkeley, she befriended a crowd who were busy promoting the communist cause in China. Among them were New Zealand Rhodes scholars, James Bertram and Ian Milner. James regaled her with stories of traveling through China and interviewing Mao Zedong. For a time, Rona dated Archie Williams, an African-American Olympist, gold medalist, also an engineering student at Berkeley, which brought home the power of American racism to her. She remembered, "I never experienced the venom on the streets and on the bus like I did when I was with him." Witnessing a Ku Klux Klan rally when traveling really underlined this experience. Rona was deeply affected by a speech given by Harry Bridges, left-wing leader of the newly formed International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, to a crowd of 10,000. He brought home to her how working class solidarity could win equalization of work on the waterfront and fight racism by overturning Jim Crow segregation on West Coast waterfront gangs. As Marion Schultz has so keenly observed, it was the modern dance movement that Rona studied and practiced in New York that was most transformative. She loved the radical, political, mimetic dance that was made by and for workers. For Rona, depicting current political and social themes through movement was the class struggle in action. She said, "I felt that modern dance had a role to play in reflecting life and what it could be. It could be a challenge to people." She felt this way about radical theatre, poetry, and music as well. They were crucial ways both to critique capitalism and offer the dream of an alternative non-capitalist future. In 1939, Rona returned to New Zealand and got a job as a physical welfare officer for the Department of Internal Affairs in Hamilton. And for those of you nostalgic for bloomers, this image is for you. She infused her physical education programs with modern dance techniques and joined the People's Theatre, where she met Communist Victoria College graduate Ron Meek. They shared ideas about art, got married in 1942. Rona also met a man called Philip Smithles, who was determined music, theatre, and dance would replace military drill and physical education in schools across the country. As Department of Education Superintendent of Physical Education, he lured Rona to Wellington with a promotion to Physical Welfare Branch Senior Women's Officer in 1943. It was not long after she left Hamilton that Rona's marriage to Ron fell apart. In Wellington, Rona fell in with a bohemian communist crowd involved in Unity Theatre. Unity was formed by working class communists deeply involved in the trade union movement. They staged dramatic and anti-fascist plays in an effort to bring theatre to the people. They shared rooms and finances with the Society for Closer Relations with Russia. It was there that Rona met Austrian refugee Bert Roth. He was involved in both organizations. He was screening Russian war films depicting the successes of the Red Army, at the same time working backstage for Unity Productions. Rona became the Unity Theatre treasurer and was recruited to the Communist Party. Right, so watch out for being recruited into those roles and organizations. At the French-made coffee bar, a kind of mecca for the left and arty, Rona regularly discussed art, dance, and theatre for the revolution. They debated party wartime issues, the class struggle, anti-fascism, and the effects of Nazism, but not always uncritically. Bert Roth claims to have introduced Rona to a man called Chip Bailey, a taxi-driving Unity member who was briefly expelled from the Communist Party for bohemian behaviour. He was not alone at this time. They got to know each other at a party at Rona's flat that went on for several days. Rona Smithles entertained everyone with handstands, Bert remembered. That's our, Department of Education superintendent, by the way, just putting it out there. It was during this time that Rona and Chip fell in love, and they would get married in 1945. So this was a time when the Communist Party was at the height of its popularity. Stalin's Soviet Union was an ally, and the party was deeply committed to a people's war against fascism. Kerry Taylor writes, the Communist Party took up an almost super patriotic line, advocating that all parts of society were to be mobilized in support of the war effort. Striking and energetic, Peter Franks explains, Rona stood out in the largely male, largely working class party. And yes, the party was dominated at this time by working class men active in their trade unions, but a small number of party women had carved out leadership roles as well. Elsie Locke and Connie Birchfield proved their abilities when the all-male Central Committee was jailed thanks to police surveillance work in 1933. Elsie by this stage had moved to Christchurch, but Connie, a fearless and passionate street corner speaker, remained a force to be reckoned with. She gained thousands of votes in Wellington local body elections in 1944. Mary Heptonstall, raised by a communist aunt on the West Coast, was very active at the time too in the Newtown branch. Rona's friend Jackie Matthews remembered, it was thought Rona would never last the distance in the party. She was the wrong class, wrong sex. But as I always demonstrate, middle class wealth sustained Rona's commitment to activist work. Rona deeply appreciated what she learned at weekly Communist Party branch meetings. Marxist literature opened the world to her, and she gained remarkable organizational skills. Rona adopted the party's United Front approach, right? Uniting working people around their immediate economic concerns, irrespective of their political affiliation. And her key communist work was in her union, the Public Service Association. With a group of recent Victoria College graduates working in the clerical division, Rona formed the first PSA Women's Subcommittee. They aimed to bring about equal opportunity for all without regard to sex, class, religion, or social position. They focused on equal pay for equal work and career advancement in public service work. Now remember, this was a time when female rates were set at about half the male rate in the public service. Career hierarchies were truncated for women, and once married, women were expected to leave the public service altogether. Rona told Public Service Journal readers, women's efforts in this war have surely proved their worth. They now have every right to demand equal treatment with men in the question of salary. Women must fight for the right as a unified body. Rona led a recruitment campaign at the grassroots of the union and was elected women's representative on the PSA National Committee alongside Mary Boyd. The surveys that they collected revealed that most women workers would only support equal pay for equal work if universal family allowances also became available to give married mothers some financial independence. So what Rona learned from this work was the importance of campaigning from where grassroots people are at, from where the rank and file are at in the language of the time. She was a member of an unofficial left caucus of progressive PSA trade unionists called Kōrero, who ensured left-leaning Jack Lewin was elected PSA president in 1946. Lewin transformed the PSA from a toothless, passive weakling into a powerful instrument for social change. And under pressure from campaigners, universal family allowances were introduced in 1946, and permanency for female cadets was also achieved in 1947, but not equal pay or opportunity for a promotion. As many of you will know, that had to wait until 1960. As Richard Hill and Stephen Loveridge have established, communists and those they worked with in any kind of way remain the main target of state surveillance during the war. And so from this time, Jack Lewin and Rona Bailey were spied upon. Rona stayed committed to cultural work. She acted in Unity Productions, and in 1945 formed a consciousness-raising modern dance group with Philip Smithers. Dance performance themes called for revolt against dehumanizing forces that threaten to turn us into robots. She also came together with other left, Labour and communist women to form the Women's Charter movement, the subject of a fabulous book edited by Marie Russell and Therese O'Connell, Gay Simpkin. At a Wellington Charter meeting in 1948, she reported on attending the World Youth Festival in Prague, meeting with organizations in former Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia and Hungary, and their advances on equal rights and economic recognition of housewives and mothers at the time. It was during this trip she interviewed Yugoslav communist leader Josip Tito. Now, as the Cold War emerged internationally, New Zealand communist forces began to wane. From 1947, there was a concerted and successful effort by Labour government ministers and Federation of Labour leader Fintan Patrick Walsh to remove communists and other militant trade unionists who worked with them from trade union office. So, for example, Walsh set out to destroy Jack Lewin's influence in the union movement by portraying him as a tool of the Communist Party of New Zealand. PSA hand in glove with commos, thundered a Truth headline. But with PSA members standing firmly behind their president, Walsh was unsuccessful. The Carpenters Union became a target in 1949. Chip suffered from red baiting in the Drivers Union. And he survived that, but was then expelled from the Communist Party for independence of thought in 1949. Rona wanted to leave too, but Chip convinced her to stay. And then their daughter, Meg, was born. In such circumstances, Chip could care for Meg while Rona went to Communist Party meetings. So this kind of anti-communism, right, that was generating heat during this time was continued by the national government elected in that year as well. And the next target was the powerful left-leaning New Zealand Waterside Workers Union. Now, conflict had erupted at the 1950 Federation of Labour conference. And it was at that conference that the Waterside Workers Union with a small number of other leftist delegates walked out. Said, no, we're not being part of this anymore. They formed a rival national organisation for unions called the Trade Union Congress. In Rona's opinion, this was a mistake because what it did was it left the reactionary leadership in control of the Federation of Labour. And then the Trade Union Congress could easily be branded as all communists and demonised in the eyes of an increasingly anti-communist public. The 1951 waterfront lockout was triggered by a disagreement over a wage rise. Waterside workers refused overtime until their dispute with their employers was sorted out. But instead of this happening, the employers called the action an illegal strike and locked out all wharf workers until they gave up their claims. Huge numbers of other workers thought it was incredibly unfair and declared solidarity strikes in support. Chip Bailey and the Wellington drivers went on strike for 5 months during this time to support waterfront workers. So Rona's job was their only source of income at this time. The national government backed employers and brought waterfront strike regulations into force. What that meant was the Waterside Workers Union was basically just deregistered. It had all its funds and records seized. Police powers were increased so that anyone who was seen to be aiding waterside workers could be arrested. Their side of the story was banned from the media, and then troops were enlisted to unload cargo on the wharves. The Federation of Labour joined in, condemning the Waterside Workers Union leadership as communist-dominated misleaders, although Jock Barnes and Toby Hill were certainly not communists. Chip Bailey and cartoonist Max Bollinger produced regular bulletins and pamphlets to tell the water-sided side of the story. This illegal work was done undercover with a typewriter hidden at the Bailey's flat. Rona recalled many late-night adventures delivering material to be run off and distributed. One harrowing police raid when her flat was ransacked while 2-year-old Meg slept on. To Rona's immense relief, they did not discover the typewriter. After 5 months, the lockout ended in defeat, and the New Zealand Waterside Workers Union was thoroughly dismantled. Rona recalled, "It was a privilege to be involved in the struggle and a phenomenal learning experience as well." But she was also critical of the Communist Party for not taking a more independent line from the union. So she celebrated the victory of solidarity on one hand, and on the other mourned the destruction of militant trade unionism after this time. It was in its aftermath too that Rona contracted tuberculosis. So she spent all of 1952 laid up in isolation. I think this says much about her character, that she spent the time collecting New Zealand popular songs and ballads, which she would later publish in this book here with Bert Roth. Once she recovered, she quit state sector work and became the Society for Closer Relations with Russia's national secretary. Chip Bailey did rejoin the Communist Party and rebuilt the Wellington Drivers' Union with an active, informed, and conscious rank and file, and he was elected secretary for his efforts. He mentored other communists you may have heard of in the Drivers' Union: Pat Kelly, Tama Puota, Ken Douglas, and Bill Anderson. Peter Franks writes, "Chip was a good organizer, a devastating debater. He was a central figure in re-establishing a strong left-wing presence in the union movement." They also had personal support. Rona's father gave them the money to build a house in Mount Victoria at this time. Now, Rona stayed committed to the Communist Party, but about a quarter of the membership left after Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin's reign of terror and Red Army repression in Hungary in 1956. To explain her decision to stay, Rona quoted from Howard Fast's US novel, The Pledge, and this is what she said. "And about the party, it's like everything else. There are people in it who are damned near saints, and there are others I don't want to know or talk about. If there was something better around, I'd join it in a minute. But there isn't anything else that isn't totally corrupt. As for the Communist Party, it's been attacked from every side. The government is determined to destroy it. Its leaders are narrow, not bright. We lose membership. We're afraid to stand up and attack what's wrong in the Soviet Union, and a hell of a lot is wrong. Much as I hate a lot of what goes on in the party, I have even more contempt for those who leave the party and go over to the other side. No matter how much we choke creative people and isolate ourselves from the rest of the country, we still have never betrayed the workers." So that was Rona's description of that decision. She also said that she had the greatest admiration, the initiative, courage, dedication, and sheer bloody hard work by rank and file of the party, the struggle for justice and a new social order during an incredibly difficult Reds under the beds time. And I think that's what kept her committed. Tragedy struck when Chip Bailey died suddenly from a brain tumor on the 25th of April, 1963. He was aged only 42. Rona lamented, "We had everything in common in a wonderful life together, full of laughter, joy, ups and downs, and everything that goes to make life really worthwhile. But most of all, we had the party and the working class." To solve their financial woes, Rona took a part-time job as a New Zealand correspondent for the New China news agency, Tinchua. Later that year, Rona returned to her old love, teaching rhythmic movement at the New Zealand Drama Council Summer School, run by Nola Miller. 14-year-old Meg was the youngest participant. Rona would support Nola to establish the New Zealand Drama School in 1970. Rona was elected to the Communist Party of New Zealand's National Committee and became immersed in ideological debates about the Sino-Soviet split in the 1960s. After the party decided to support China, a minority who supported the Soviet Union left to form the Socialist Unity Party in 1966. Rona responded, "It was quite clear that here were the new Social Democrats." As Rona confessed later, "I was ruthless in carrying out the party line." Sadly, it was the Communist Party that would leave Rona. From 1967, Rona received a regular private income generated from her parents' business, and this enabled her full-time grassroots activism from here on in. She helped form the Wellington Committee on Vietnam in 1965, committed to ending the conflict of Vietnam and upholding the Vietnamese people's right to self-determination. While the anti-war movement was very small at first, and I think this image captures that, committees on Vietnam formed in 18 towns across New Zealand, and by 1970, thousands came out and joined demonstrations. All during this time, Rona put into practice her belief that communists should work cooperatively with others of different political persuasions to build a strong, united protest movement. But public anti-communism, differences over strategy, and communist sectarianism made it difficult. Rona was really proud of the unity developed between a diverse array of members of the Wellington Committee on Vietnam, despite all of these challenges. Rona's style of activism became increasingly at odds with the ideological position of the Communist Party leadership, who began to dismiss trade union officials as corrupt pawns of capitalism and castigate social movements for not being explicitly anti-imperialist and for socialism. When Rona and Jack Manson, the leaders of the Wellington District Committee, challenged this position, the whole branch was expelled from the party in 1970. They continued to meet anyway, studying Marxist-Leninist works to inform organizing work in both the anti-war and anti-apartheid movements. And these efforts drew university students to communism. Peter Franks joined the Wellington Committee on Vietnam as a student and remembers communists offered a compelling analysis of the war, connected what was going on in Vietnam with New Zealand society. They revealed New Zealand as unjust and class-ridden and advocated both seeking to liberate New Zealand society and standing in solidarity with oppressed people across the world. What drew him most to Marxism, Franks explained, was the practice of the people I met in the anti-war movement who were communists. They were respected leaders because they worked hard, consistently put forward programs of action, and were willing to work with people with different ideas towards a common position. While they worked for their own ideas, they also worked for unity in the movement. So Franks was part of a small group of students who worked with Rona to form the Wellington Marxist-Leninist organization in 1976. Racism was given greater attention by activists at the time too. Rona had been part of the No Māori, No Tour campaign in 1959. The Citizens Association for Racial Equality had formed in 1964 to focus on race relations in South Africa and racism experienced by Māori and Pacific Island migrants to Auckland City. To their delight, the 1967 All Blacks tour of South Africa was cancelled. Wellington Drivers Union organiser Tama Poata spearheaded the Māori Organisation on Human Rights, which opposed apartheid, racism in all spheres of social and political life, and Māori involvement in unjust wars overseas. And nationally, students came together to form Halt All Races Tours in 1969 to end sporting contacts with South Africa. Cunningly, the South African Prime Minister, John Vorster, adapted the rules so that Māori and Pacific Island players could be included in the touring All Blacks team as honorary whites in 1970. Strategy paid off. The 1970 tour went ahead with 1 Samoan and 2 Māori players. Rona became treasurer and secretary of the National Anti-Apartheid Committee, formed in 1972, to coordinate anti-apartheid activities across the country. They shared office space with NZUSA, so students were heavily involved. Rona worked closely with Hart Chair Trevor Richards. Activists chalked up a win when the Norman Kirk-led Labour government cancelled the 1973 Springbok tour of New Zealand. So Rona was busy all this time. She helped produce educational materials, action campaigns to end all New Zealand economic, sporting, cultural, and diplomatic ties with South Africa. But she was also about undermining the South African apartheid system, supporting African liberation movements, and generating widespread opposition to apartheid and colonialism in Southern Africa. This was an incredibly broad agenda. It was much more difficult to generate grassroots support for this kind of broad scope. And so rugby tours continued to be a major focus. The National Anti-Apartheid Committee merged with Hart in 1918. That year, Rona also supported the transformation of the Wellington Marxist-Leninist organisation into the Workers' Communist League. The party applied Marxist-Leninist Mao Zedong thought to common realities of domestic and international situations and aimed to unite democratic forces under working-class leadership. In many ways, the League was an orthodox communist party. Class was the primary analytic. It operated according to democratic centralism and was partially covert. However, as Rona's comrade Ron Smith reflected, its student-dominated membership helped establish women's refuge to shelter survivors of domestic violence, unions for unemployed workers and beneficiaries, and sought to fight sexism and male chauvinism, and self-sacrificingly worked for the revolution, seeing it as general liberation, not just freedom from exploitation by capital. Rona's main party work was in the cultural workers branch. Their amateur agitprop theatre group, Frontline, aimed to expose capitalism and promote socialist ideas. Frontline performances included Knockout, commissioned by the Wellington Unemployed Workers Union, and performed at a national union conference on unemployment in 1981. Other productions were Paying the Price, that was about car plant restructuring that was going on, and then this one depicted here, Whistle's Gonna Blow, exposing violence against women. Rona describes the anti-Springbok tour movement in 1981 as an extraordinary experience. She attended every march, ate a lot of chocolate, and at one event in Wellington was battered so severely by police, she was hospitalized. Rona was among a list of communists Prime Minister Robert Muldoon released to the press as the instigators of the anti-tour movement. Rona was insulted on behalf of the 100,000 people who were protesting across the country. Although she did take kindly to Muldoon's description of her as the high priestess of New Zealand communism. After the tour, bitter divisions emerged in heart over the direction of the movement. Māori activists challenged the anti-apartheid movement to turn its attention to racism in New Zealand, while others thought the issue shouldn't be mixed. There was more work to be done to support liberation struggles in Southern Africa. As Rona approached her 70th birthday, she left heart and reevaluated her communist principles and work. While Rona had felt no personal discrimination when she joined the Communist Party back in 1943, she was critical of the fact that women's oppression was never regarded as important party work. She also decided that democratic centralism as an organizational structure didn't work in practice. She reflected, as young women, it stops you thinking in your head. I gave away that gut feeling if things were wrong in the interests of them up there, the national leadership know better. They have more information, they must be right. Centralism became much more important than democracy. The other key problem, she noted, was the lack of analysis of New Zealand. We never got to the guts of what Aotearoa is about. Bert Roth agreed with her. Communist parties were guilty of applying politics evolved overseas without any attempt to adapt them to the different circumstances of New Zealand, he wrote. And persistent sectarianism was an ongoing problem. Now, while Rona continued to strongly believe in the principles of socialism, she decided to leave the Workers' Communist League and departed on friendly terms. It was the challenges laid down by Māori activists that haunted her. You've worked so hard in the anti-apartheid movement, Rona. Why don't you ever look over your shoulder and look what was happening to our people? Rona began to read New Zealand history. I felt appalled, amazed. I'd never learned what happened to Māori people in this country. First, she felt guilt. Then she read some Frantz Fanon, realized she needed to decolonize her mind, and enrolled in some anti-racism courses. She remembered, I began to look at my own identity as a Pākehā. God spare me from the Pākehā people who become what I call born-again Māori, who wipe their own culture and think only Māori is good. You've got to have a place to stand here. The treaty gives you a place, but also responsibility. I know where I stand. I know what my identity is, so therefore I can deal with issues. I don't have guilt, but responsibility. It's the putting right that counts, and to level the playing field a bit before you can have true partnership. It was a painful but necessary process, she recalled. Māori activists challenged Pākehā to educate their own about the treaty and colonialism to better support Māori aspirations for change. So Bob Scott from the National Council of Churches program brought together 22 Pākehā community groups in late 1985, and they formed Project Waitangi, Pākehā Debate the Treaty, an educational project that was set up to target Middle New Zealand. Rona was part of the core group operating in Wellington that worked with autonomous groups around New Zealand. They were all there to provide such education for Pākehā and be accountable to Māori through iwi and other sectoral organisations. They wrote many submissions and media releases to support Māori initiatives during the time, such as Moana Jackson's groundbreaking 1988 report, Māori in the Criminal Justice System, to Whaipanga Hau, an investigation of the criminal justice system's bias against Māori. They also did media work, Project Waitangi people, to challenge any of the Māori bashing that went on by politicians of the day. Waitangi Tribunal Chief Judge Eddie Jury's words were taken to heart by people in Project Waitangi. He said, "It is the treaty that gives Pākehā the right to be here. Without the treaty, there would be no lawful authority for the Pākehā presence in this part of the South Pacific. We must remember that if we are tangata whenua, the original people, then the Pākehā are the tangata tiriti, those who belong to the land by right of that treaty." So Project Waitangi aimed to encourage Pākehā to study and discuss the Treaty of Waitangi in order to understand Pākehā commitments under the treaty, to acknowledge Māori as tangata whenua, to encourage Pākehā to study the full history of Aotearoa, to face the issues and to actively work for a genuine, bicultural, and eventually multicultural society. The surveys they conducted revealed that few Pākehā New Zealanders had even read the Treaty of Waitangi, let alone understood what it was about, and requests poured in from community groups, unions, churches, and government departments for educational workshops. The workshops began with analysis of the differences between the English and Māori texts, the history of Māori-Pākehā relations, and the relevance of the treaty in the present, encouraging participants to understand what they regarded as normal was Pākehā culture. Educators found the level of raw ethnocentrism and racism among Pākehā New Zealanders was sometimes overwhelming. The project, funded by the government, ran until 1990, and in reviewing its impact, National Coordinator Marianne Haggie found, instead of defining, criticising and hampering Māori goals, more Pākehā were willing to enable, listen, or at least stand aside without angst or guilt, so Māori could pursue things in their own way. Also, there was a growing awareness, both nationally and internationally, that colonisation itself was damaging to Indigenous peoples, and those who benefited from it had a responsibility to redress wrongs and deal justly with the present-day consequences. Some organisations took what they'd learned and embarked on real organisation change to recognise the Treaty of Waitangi and work biculturally. Others continued the education work Project Waitangi had started. Rona became a drama school trustee in 1988, facilitated Treaty of Waitangi workshops with their students, and she was part of a successful process to remake the school as a bicultural organisation, Te Kura Toi Whakaari o Aotearoa. In her 80s, Rona turned her attention to archiving the past and encouraging more working class history. And this is when, as Gordon told you, was when she got involved with founding the Trade Union History Project in 1987. That is now the Labour History Project. David Grant fondly remembers committee meetings at Rona's house, where she would provide goodies and glasses of wine. Can I just put that out there again for the committee? In typical style, Rona's last protest was the foreshore in Cybe Hikoi in 2004. She provided hot soup at Te Papa and joined the final leg to Parliament. Rona passed away at the age of 90 on the 7th of September 2005. So let these images of Rona sink in and inspire us. What speaks to me right now is Rona's commitment to working in community with people from different walks of life to combat the forces of patriarchal colonial capitalism, the many-headed hydra, or should I say the three-headed taniwha. We are in a time of struggle and we need each other. Rona inspires us to be activists rooted in our communities. As the wise Helen Lendoff recently wrote, to enmesh meaningfully into communities, to work, play, be alongside people with a wide spectrum of ideology, ages, beliefs, ethnicities, preferences, abilities, ways of communicating, skills, needs, and issues. The future we face is asking of us to grow up in terms of what community really means, to learn to navigate the discomfort of disagreements, to learn to communicate and care across different ideologies, an embodied practice of intersectionality, which invites anyone with privilege and power to divest of it for the interdependent co-arising of us all, but especially for folks with more systems of oppression stacked against them. Stepping deep into community is challenging, triggering, bumpy, uncomfortable, but it's also rich, beautiful, full of surprises and humor, and it's the only way forward, she writes. Kia ora. So putting my hat on as part of the Labour History Project Committee, we want to invite you all to come and have a glass of wine with us, or something to drink if you don't like wine, and have a conversation with each other. Yeah, come and have something to eat.
Well, thank you very much, Cybèle. Not much I can say after that. I don't think we've been very lucky in recent times to have these brilliant talks, books and so on, focusing on someone's life and putting the social history and beside them. They all make wonderful deeds. This is yet another magnificent contribution. So thank you very much for that. Just before, can I also thank the members of the Labour History Project Committee who helped put all this together, particularly Grace Miller, Russell Campbell and Ross Teppert, I think were the main people. And as Cybèle said, it'd be great if you could join us for a glass of wine in a moment or two. If you're not a member, Russell has membership forms. If you're a member in arrears, Russell can tell you where to pay. Yeah, thank you again, Cybèle. It's been a great lecture. It's lovely to be taken back through history and reminded of these various forces and things going on. I'm getting old now, so yeah, it takes me a while to remember the 1970s. So it's really great, just to see these put in the context of someone's life, the events going on around it. And as I said when I started, there are several of those recently. We've been really fortunate over the last 5 or 6 years. So thank you for adding to that, Cybèle. It was a magnificent lecture.